The road to solitude. The sky was a blanket of gray, thick and heavy, promising rain that felt as endless as the road Dave was traveling. The air was humid and dense, and the dense jungle seemed to press in on either side of him, making the world feel smaller. His old sedan, weighed down by what little he had left of his life in the city, rattled as it rolled over the uneven road. He'd been driving for hours, alone with only the hum of the engine and the occasional rumble of distant thunder. Dave was a man running from ghosts, the kind that lived in his past. Not long ago, he was a well-respected physician, someone others looked up to. But that life had unraveled quickly after an accident he couldn't prevent, one that left him dismissed from the profession he had devoted his life to. His reputation, his confidence, his sense of purpose, all of it lay shattered in the rearview mirror. Now, he was on his way to a small, isolated cabin he'd rented in the forests of Davao, hoping the solitude would silence the regrets that haunted him. As he rounded a bend in the road, the rain finally began to fall, soft at first, just a few drops on the windshield. But within minutes, the drizzle turned into a torrential downpour, sheets of water hammering down on his car. Dave leaned forward, squinting through the thick curtain of rain, his headlights barely piercing the gloom. That's when he saw it, a small, gray shape on the roadside, nearly blending in with the muddy ground. At first, he thought it was just debris, maybe a fallen branch or a pile of leaves washed up from the forest. But as he drove closer, he could see it more clearly, a dog, lying still and barely moving, its fur matted with mud and rain. It was Chubby, with a broad, flattened face and big, drooping ears, though they seemed weighed down by water and exhaustion. The dog's head lifted slightly, eyes glazed with a mix of confusion and fear, before it flopped back down, as if even that little movement had taken all the energy it had left. Dave's heart clenched. He didn't know what possessed him, but before he could even think, he found himself pulling over to the side of the road. He looked down at the rain hammering against the windshield and hesitated for a brief moment. Was he really going to do this? But something in the way the dog looked up at him, even from a distance, drove him to act. He threw open the car door and immediately felt the sting of cold rain on his skin. The water soaked through his clothes instantly, dripping down his face as he hurried toward the dog, whose small body seemed to sink further into the mud with every passing second. Thunder boomed above, rattling the trees around them, and lightning split the sky, illuminating the pitiful creature for a brief moment. Kneeling down, Dave could see that the dog was in bad shape. Its fur was thick with mud, its eyes barely open, and its ribs were faintly visible beneath the matted gray coat. The poor thing was shivering, each breath labored and shallow. "Hey, buddy," Dave murmured softly, trying not to startle it. "It's okay. I'm here." He slipped off his jacket, wrapping it around the dog as gently as he could. The dog didn't resist. It just lay there, limp and heavy, as if all fight had left it. When he lifted it into his arms, the dog's head lolled against his shoulder, and for a brief, unsettling moment, he wondered if he was too late. But then he felt a faint, warm breath against his neck and knew the dog was still holding on. With the rain pounding down on him, Dave hurried back to the car, the mud sucking at his feet with every step. He slid back into the driver's seat, cradling the dog close to his chest, and quickly shut the door. Inside, the world felt quieter, the rain now just a muffled roar against the roof. He carefully laid the dog on the passenger seat, wrapping his jacket around it more securely to provide warmth. The dog's eyes were still half closed, but they opened just a sliver, meeting Dave's gaze with a look that felt grateful, somehow. As if it knew he'd saved it. "Let's get you warmed up," Dave whispered, reaching over to turn on the heater. Warm air filled the car, and he angled the vents toward the dog, hoping it would help. The dog gave a soft sigh, its eyes fluttering closed again as it seemed to relax for the first time. Dave noticed a faint scar on its forehead, partially hidden by the fur, and wondered how it had gotten there. It was a strange mark, almost like a symbol, though he couldn't make out its shape in the dim light. As he sat back, he felt an odd sense of calm settle over him. There was something about the dog, something quiet and resilient, that spoke to a part of him he thought had been lost. He reached out, gently scratching behind its ears, and the dog let out a soft, contented whimper. "You need a name, don't you?" Dave said, a faint smile breaking through his usually somber expression. How about Max? The dog's ears twitched, and for a moment, Dave could have sworn it almost nodded. He laughed softly, feeling warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. All right, Max it is, he said, giving the dog one last pat before turning his attention back to the road. They drove on in silence, the rain still pounding down, but now, with Max by his side, the darkness outside felt a little less oppressive. Dave found himself glancing over at Max every few minutes, watching the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. The little dog seemed to be sleeping deeply, its small body finally at peace. But as they passed deeper into the forest, something strange happened. Max's eyes opened, just a sliver, and for a moment, Dave could have sworn there was something unusual about them. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, he thought he saw a faint glimmer, almost like a third eye opening on Max's forehead. It was barely visible, hidden beneath the fur and the scar, but it was there, watching him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He blinked, and the glimmer was gone. Max was just a sleeping dog again, his breathing soft and steady. Dave shook his head, chalking it up to his tired mind and the stress of the past few days. He took a deep breath, focusing on the road ahead, trying to ignore the unease that had settled in his stomach. The rest of the drive passed in silence, but the strange feeling lingered, like a shadow at the edge of his vision. As they reached the small cabin he had rented, nestled deep in the heart of the forest, he glanced at Max one last time. The dog was still asleep, wrapped snugly in his jacket, but the image of that strange glimmer lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Max than met the eye. With a sigh, he carefully lifted the sleeping dog from the passenger seat, cradling it in his arms as he stepped out into the rain once more. The cabin loomed before him, its dark windows staring out like empty eyes. He carried Max inside, setting him gently on a pile of blankets by the fire. The warmth filled the room, and as Dave settled into his new home, he felt a faint sense of peace wash over him. But as he lay down that night, the shadows crept in, and strange dreams filled his mind, images of dark forests, flickering lights, and a pair of glowing eyes watching him from the darkness.